As British Consul General in Calgary, I cover the 3 Prairie provinces, and my main role is to promote trade and investment and innovation collaboration. But I also cover the energy sector for the whole of Canada from the team in Calgary, so we cover not just oil and gas in Alberta, but up to the Maritimes and the offshore oil and gas industry there. So I pop up to St. John's occasionally, and there's a very close link between the UK and Canada in the oil and gas sector, because obviously we're an oil and gas producer ourselves. But when I was asked to speak today, and seeing that the theme of the conference was embracing challenge and creating opportunities, which is something that's dear to your hearts as economic development professionals at this time in the economic cycle. But for the UK, it has particular resonance with Brexit, a very unexpected challenge that we're now embracing and seeking to turn into an opportunity. And the government, I don't know how closely you've been watching it, but with the new government came in with Theresa May as our Prime Minister, and she has sort of surfed a wave of political support that came out of the referendum result, and she is seeking to deliver a new vision for the UK, and that's very interesting because the UK is seen to be, well, obviously we are a country that's known for our heritage history, but here we are projecting a modern vision for the UK in a changing global scene. And we're calling that vision Global Britain, and I'll tell you a bit about it, and maybe some of it might resonate with the work that you're doing, even at a local stage. But I didn't just want to talk about Brexit, but also, as economic development specialist, to say a bit about the importance between the relationship between the UK and Canada in terms of trade and investment. Because I think a lot of people don't realise that Canada is, on a per capita basis, the largest investor in the UK. Who knew that? No, don't. Second only, in real terms, second to the US. But yeah, Canada is the second largest investor in the UK. And I'll come on to a bit about why it's so large. But the UK-Canada relationship is probably the closest relationship between 2 countries in the world. I think since I've been here, I've realized that we overlap in so many spheres, not only, of course, do we share the Queen as our head of state, but we're both members of the G7, the G20, the Commonwealth, NATO, OECD, the Five Eyes intelligence network, which is really important with terrorism these days. But there's no other country that we have that range of relationships with. Like the US is not part of the Commonwealth, Australia's not part of the G7. So I think it's a unique and very close relationship. But we don't take that for granted. And trade, it's really a really important modern trading and investment relationship. And as I said, Canada is the second largest investor in the UK. Canadian pension funds and institutional investors invest heavily in UK infrastructure. A lot of people don't realise that Canadian investors own or part-own 13 British airports, 23 British ports. They own the UK end of the Channel Tunnel. They own Scotland's biggest gas network. They operate our national lottery. And last year, a consortium of Canadian pension funds bought the City of London Airport for £2 billion. The Canadian company Brookfield is one of the largest property owners in London with the Canary Wharf development. So it's like massive. So in turn, the UK is the 4th largest investor in Canada. And the UK is Canada's 3rd largest export market. And when we look at, and I'll come on to talk a bit about CETA, the new EU-Canada trade agreement, but 40% of Canada's exports to the EU go to the UK. So yeah, it's pretty important stuff. Quick question. Niall's not going to answer this because I think you know the answer. What's the biggest UK export to Canada? Actually, Christy might know this, but you can't. You don't know. I can't hear. Come on, no, it's not whiskey. Who said whiskey? No, it's not tea. Yeah, actually, I didn't know it was so popular here. So, but yeah, in terms of goods, not services. It is oil, yeah. The biggest UK export to Canada is oil from the North Sea, comes into the eastern refineries. And I'm not going to say anything about pipelines there. Just keep quiet on that. So, but the important thing is that we're partners in each other's success, and we want to strengthen the alliance and do even more together. And we can see the opportunities that have arisen through CETA, the new, as I mentioned, the EU-Canada Free Trade Agreement. And despite Brexit, which I'll come on to, as free trade supporters in the UK and supporters of European prosperity, we very much want CETA to succeed, whether we're a member of it or not. And for the time that the UK is a member of it, before we leave the EU, we want to help UK companies take advantage of it. Because, and I think this is very relevant for your work, CETA is estimated to be worth around $12 billion to the Canadian economy. And there's opportunities that will arise from that for Canadian companies to have preferential access to the European market. And it can help them outpace competition in terms of competitors who don't have that preferential access. It does also, of course, mean more competition in Canada from European countries, European exporters that have enhanced access to the Canadian marketplace. But that's good for your economy too. We've already seen more UK companies expanding their horizons from Europe since Brexit, and perhaps thinking that their export strategy is a bit Eurocentric and looking further afield. And certainly in our office, in the British Consulate, we've seen an increase in interest in the Canadian market. So that's partly because of CETA, partly because of Brexit. So, and I sense in the work that I do here an increase in interest from Canadian companies in the UK, particularly in the oil and gas sector, looking to diversify not just sectorally, but also geographically. So there's definitely been an upswing in activity, or certainly interest. And Canada is, for the reasons I've mentioned, the closeness of the relationship, the importance of our trade and investment, is a natural place for British companies to look at, to set up here. And we've got very large companies here, like the Wood Group in the oil and gas sector, Arup in engineering, Kinetic have just bought a company in Medicine Hat. So, British investment is very important here, and I know a lot of you who work in the economic development field are very keen to attract foreign investment. And so that there is that interest from British companies, just as there's interest from Canadian companies in the UK. So there's about 600 to 700 companies in both directions. There's about 600 to 700, we don't know exactly, but British companies in Canada and a similar number of Canadian companies in the UK. But what about Brexit and that challenge? So yes, in June of last year, the people of Britain voted to leave the European Union, but they didn't vote to leave Europe. We're not leaving Europe. I mean, geographically, we're not moving the island. So we'll very much remain part of Europe, and we'll have a new relationship with the EU. And that will happen. Next week, we will invoke Article 50, which will start the 2-year clock ticking for our departure from the EU. But Brexit, a lot of people say to me that it's like what's happening in the US, but I say Brexit is not about protectionism or isolationism. It's the reverse. It's about free trade and it's about internationalism. So why do I say that? Well, I'd like to read a short extract from a speech that our Prime Minister Theresa May gave on the 17th of January, which laid out this new vision for the UK. I mean, noting that the road ahead would be uncertain for a while we go through this negotiating period, she said, "I want the UK to emerge from this period of change stronger, fairer, more united and more outward-looking than ever before. I want us to be a secure, prosperous, tolerant country, a magnet for international talent and a home to the pioneers and investors who will shape the world ahead. I want us to be a truly global Britain, the best friend and neighbour to our European partners, but a country that reaches out beyond the borders of Europe too, a country that gets out into the world to build relationships with old friends and new allies alike." The result of the referendum was not a decision to turn inward and retreat from the world, Britain's history and culture is profoundly internationalist. I want Britain to be what we have the potential, talent, and ambition to be, a great global trading nation that is respected around the world and a strong, confident, and united at home. So that was the vision that she laid out. And that emergent vision of global Britain will see the UK stepping out from the EU, having a new relationship with the EU, but being an even more visible player on global issues in the world scene and a champion of free trade. We will remain very much part of Europe, and we will have a new free trade agreement ourselves with the EU. And it's very much in our interest that the remaining 27 countries succeed in making the EU strong and successful. Theresa May laid out 12 negotiating objectives in her speech on the 17th of January. But the key point I want to stress is that a number of those are aimed at ensuring that the UK, as a business investment, with our business and investment partners, that we protect those interests, that we protect the relationships that we have around the world with our investors and trading partners. So it's really important that the message is conveyed that Britain is open for business. We're not retreating from that important relationship. I speak to a lot of companies about it, about how they shouldn't see Brexit as a business risk, because we're talking here about uncertainty, challenge, but we're talking about opportunity. And I say to them that you face all sorts of business risks. This is, yes, okay, you might see this uncertainty as another business risk, but then you have to manage it in the same way that you manage other business risks, and that doesn't mean walking away from opportunity. There's ways that companies can mitigate those risks, for example, by having more flexible clauses in their contracts, their business contracts, that allow for variation if there's a change in price, for example, due to an unforeseen regulatory shift or shift in tariffs. So those things have traditionally been done in contracts, perhaps with third world countries, but we're not used to using them in contracts, say, between the UK and Canada, but that's no reason why we shouldn't look to use those now. The other key issue that I think has economic development professionals that you're interested in, I assume, as and I'm deeply interested in it, is why did people vote the way they did? What was the underlying reason? The same as the US, why did that, what was the Rust Belt issue? Why did they vote for that shift? And why did we have the unexpected result in the UK? And I wanted to read to you just briefly something that the Prime Minister said on that. She said, because the reason people voted as they did was not just about the EU, the institutions of the EU, the cost of the EU. It was things around globalization, technology shift, loss of jobs, immigration from other parts of the world. So there's lots of issues that people packaged together and used that referendum perhaps as a protest vote. And as a government, we've had to analyse, what. So it's not just about leaving the EU, but what else do we need to address in the economy that addresses those underlying issues? And the Prime Minister said in her speech that if we believe, as I do, that liberalism and globalisation continue to offer the best future for our world, we must deal with the downsides of those things and show that we can make these twin forces work for everyone. So we have the opportunity today to show the world that the UK can be the strongest global advocate for free markets and free trade, because we believe that globalization is a route out of poverty. And as part of this, alongside our Brexit strategy, the government's introduced a new industrial strategy. It's a strategy that's rooted in the belief that we must invest more in innovation and skills to increase our prosperity. And it's interesting looking at the budget yesterday coming out of Ottawa, that a lot of the things that you're looking at in Canada are the things that we're looking at in our new industrial strategy for the UK, particularly around innovation and shifting skills for where the skills gaps are. And we've just announced, in a similar way to Canada, vastly increased investment in innovation, new sector-specific strategies to support certain sectors. We also have the advantage, of course, in the UK of having the City of London as a global financial centre, and probably the most innovative financial centre in the world. The rate of innovation that you see coming out of London in response to the opportunities around the world, renminbi trading, masala bonds for India, green finance, the UK becoming a global leader in green finance. Those are huge new opportunities. And I think that's a message that in the economic development world, that you have to be aware of what those opportunities are and then encourage those innovative shifts that can happen quite quickly into new areas. And I think the reason London's so successful is it does have a very diverse workforce, a very multicultural workforce, and it can shift very quickly. Anyway, I'm conscious of the time, and I need to allow Niall to speak, and I will take questions after Niall's spoken. But I just wanted to end by thanking you for listening to me today. Thank you for being part of the discussion that you're having about how we embrace challenges and create opportunities, how we can mitigate uncertainty as we do that. And my message is that there's even greater opportunity to deepen the trade and investment relationship between Canada and UK, and between Alberta and the UK. And I very much want to be part of doing that. So thank you very much.